like and subscribe to the Yaksha Files for multiple new videos every week. This was one of the most intense times of my life, so I don't like to talk about this much. Even now, thinking about it makes my chest tighten, but maybe saying it out loud might help. This happened the night my parents had left me home alone. They were traveling for work and asked if I'd be okay alone for 2 nights. I said yes, as I was 17 and excited to finally be alone at my home. When they left, the house felt way bigger than usual, but too quiet. I made myself dinner, watched a movie, played a couple of games on my PlayStation 5, and finished up some homework. Around midnight, I started getting tired, so I went and got into bed. I was lying down in bed under the sheets, going through my phone, when suddenly I heard 3 soft knocks right at my bedroom door. I froze. The knocks were light, but careful. I stood up slowly from my bed. I heard my mother's voice calling me from outside the room. My stomach dropped. My parents were not home. Nobody was home but me. I didn't say anything and just listened. The voice sounded tired and was breathing heavily, like she'd ran a long way to get here. My mother's voice said again feverishly, "Please, open the door." I thought my parents had come back from their work trip, so I walked to the door and cracked it open a little, just enough to peek through. But the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no shadows, no sound at all. I shut the door quietly and locked it. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe I was just too tired and creeped out from being home alone for the first time. But then, 20 minutes later, it happened again. 3 deliberate knocks. Then my mother's voice, faint, almost whispering, said, "Open the door. Fast." This time I pressed my ear to the door. The voice was right there on the other side. It whispered, "Please, it's cold." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. I called my parents. My dad picked up the call, groggy. And when I told him what I heard, he asked me to stay put and that they'd call for help. Before I could even respond or end the call, the knocking came again. Softer, almost polite. I hung up the call and opened the door a crack and checked again. Emptiness and silence. Nobody in the hallway or down to any of the other rooms. That's when I got really scared. Something about the silence felt wrong. Heavy, like the air itself was waiting. I took a deep breath and went and got back into my bed. Then my phone started ringing. It was my dad calling to tell me that he had called the police and that they would be coming soon. The police came exactly 10 minutes later. 2 officers walked around the house, checked the porch, and checked the yard. They found nothing. They said it was probably a prank. I nodded, even though I didn't believe that for a second. That night, I didn't sleep. I left my room light on and sat with my back to the wall, staring at the door. And at around 3 in the morning, I heard tapping again. But this time, it was at my window. 3 tiny taps like fingernails on glass. I didn't move or breathe. Then the whisper came, right through the glass. My mom's voice again, exactly the same tone. The exact softness. It whispered, "Let me in. Please, let me in." I couldn't bring myself to look towards the window, and I left the house the moment light shined outside. I told my friends about the strange voice and the police visiting and finding nothing. They all thought I was just being too scared since it was my first night home alone. That evening, I went back home. My parents would come back the next day only. One more night of being home alone. Everything at home looked normal. I was sorting through a box of old notebooks when my mom called me. At one point, she asked, "Did you hear anything strange after the police came?" I told her that I didn't. I don't even know why I lied. Maybe I didn't want her to worry, or maybe I just hoped that pretending it didn't happen would make it go away. She hesitated and said, "Well, your dad and I had a weird night too." She explained that at the hotel they were staying, someone had knocked on their door late at night, and when they opened it, an old woman was standing there, shaking and asking for help. She kept asking to please let her in and that she was cold. My parents invited her in, but she was acting very weird. The old woman kept muttering that everything will be fine soon and that she will get her son back. Then my mom went quiet. Her voice turned small and she whispered. She kept saying your name. I felt cold all over. Before I could say anything, the phone switched off on its own and everything suddenly went silent behind me, like the air pressure dropped. And then I heard it. 3 taps, right behind me, on my storeroom door, soft and slow, exactly the same rhythm as before. Then a whisper, lower this time, almost childlike. Let me in, please. Not my mom's voice now, something thinner and smaller, like someone trying to imitate my mother but failing. I was scared and shouted, "No, I won't," and there was no response from the storeroom. My phone came back to life on its own and started ringing again, but I was frozen in place and couldn't move my hands. Then the closet door creaked open on its own, just an inch, then another, just enough for me to see inside. Nobody was there, just boxes, old coats. But on the floor was a small muddy footprint, a child's footprint, and a little scrap of paper. I picked it up. Faded handwriting, shaky and uneven. The letter, faded and old from its age, whispered, "Don't let her in." I ran out of the house, called my parents, and bolted straight to the hotel they were staying at, and didn't go back to the house that night. Or ever. We switched apartments a week after that incident. But even now, in my new apartment miles away, sometimes I hear it again. 3 soft taps and my mom's voice whispering my name. But I know better now. Whatever it is, I should never let her in. Honestly, I don't think people would ever believe me when I tell them this story. They might just think I'm making this up, because I am a fan of horror flicks and paranormal movies. But I never expected my life to become like one. My parents had gone out of town for a family event I couldn't miss school for, so I was home alone for 3 nights. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed alone, so I wasn't really nervous or anxious. I made myself some instant noodles, binge-watched a show, and doom-scrolled Instagram for way too long, even though I had class the next day. And finally, at around 11 p.m., I went to my room to sleep. It had started raining outside lightly, and that usually helps me fall asleep faster. I had just gotten comfortable under the sheets and cozied up to play a horror narration story. And that's when I heard something. A dull thud, and then another, slow and spaced out, almost like footsteps. And they were coming from inside the wall. I froze. Not because it was loud, but because it sounded wrong. It sounded like someone walking. I sat up slowly. The footsteps moved along the wall behind my bed, one heavy step at a time, and my heart was pounding so hard, I thought whoever or whatever was inside could probably hear it. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. I waited, but nothing happened for at least a full minute. Long enough that I almost convinced myself it was just the house settling. But then the footsteps started again, this time further down, near the corner of my room. It was slow, dragging, like it wasn't in a hurry. I got out of bed and left the room without turning my back to that wall. I slept in the living room that night with all the lights on. The next morning, everything felt normal again, quiet and bright. I thought maybe I had just scared myself, but the second night I was convinced that wasn't the case. I was lying in bed again, and at around midnight I heard it. The same footsteps, only this time they were coming from the hallway inside the hallway wall. I held my breath as the footsteps moved very slowly from one end to the other. Then it stopped right outside my bedroom door. I swear I heard breathing, soft and steady, coming from right behind the drywall. My whole body went cold. I didn't even move to get my phone at first. After a few seconds, the footsteps continued, this time moving away toward the kitchen wall. I finally got the courage to call my mom. She didn't laugh. She didn't say I was imagining things. She just whispered quietly, "Don't worry about that. I've heard it too." That scared me more than the footsteps did. The third night was when things got really bad. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to a scratching sound. Not fast scratching. Slow, light, steady. And it was coming from the wall right behind my bed. I sat up instantly. The scratching moved upward, then sideways, like someone dragging their fingernails along the inside of the drywall. It made my teeth hurt just listening to it. And then it stopped. I leaned forward just a little. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to convince myself it wasn't real. That's when a man's voice came through the wall, steady and calm. It asked, "Is someone there?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I scrambled off the bed and pressed myself against the opposite wall. Then the voice spoke again, a little louder this time. "If you can hear me, please free me. I am here." I didn't respond or even breathe. Then the slow footsteps started again, moving away from me. But soon I could hear a second set of footsteps coming from the hallway outside my room. The new ones were fast and heavy, and it was coming from the far end of the wall, straight towards my room, like something sprinting through the wall. I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor. I didn't even tell him what happened. I just begged him to come over. He arrived in 2 minutes and checked every room, every corner, but found nothing. And when I told him what I heard, he said I was just imagining it. I couldn't blame him. It was a little hard to believe. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just hoped I didn't hear any more footsteps. My parents came home the next morning and I begged them to call someone to inspect the walls. They hired a repair guy who came with equipment to check for leaks, rodents, or damage. He opened a small section of the wall behind my bed, and his eyebrows pulled together immediately. Inside the wall, behind the bricks and cement, was a crawl space, a tiny one, barely wide enough for a person to move through. And inside it were old toys, a rusted metal cup, a torn blanket, and dust everywhere. But what scared me most were the shoe prints, fresh ones, leading further into the dark corner of the wall, but not coming back. The repair guy asked, "Does someone go in there?" I just shook my head. There was no way to explain it. The calm voice I had heard asking me to free it must have wanted me to find this. It was asking me to get rid of the items that were holding it down and trapping its soul even after death. That evening, we burned the items in a small fire pit while my mom said some simple prayers. For a moment, I felt relieved, like the house itself was lighter, but that feeling didn't last. Because as the fire burned down to ashes, I kept thinking about those heavy, angry footsteps that sprinted toward me last night, the ones that sounded nothing like the calm voice that had whispered to me. It was chasing something. Or someone, and if the person it was chasing is gone now, then what happens next? Who will it go after? That thought still keeps me up at night, and every once in a while, even in our new home, I swear I hear it again. A single, heavy step, somewhere inside the walls. About a year ago, I was house-sitting for my older sister. She was traveling for work and didn't want to leave her place empty. Her apartment is small, 1 bedroom, 1 guest room, tiny kitchen and thin walls. Nothing special about it. At least, not at first. The first night was normal, nothing really happened, and at around 1 a.m. I decided to go to sleep in the guest room. I was half asleep thinking about what to do the next day when a creak coming from the hallway shook me out of my sleep and thoughts. I sat up and listened, but heard nothing else. I told myself it was nothing and was about to lie back down, and then I heard it again. A slow, heavy creak. Right outside the guest room door. Frozen, I held my breath. The door has a tiny gap at the bottom, so I could see a sliver of light from the hallway and a faint shadow. Someone was standing on the other side of the door. I didn't move and just stared at that shadow. After about 10 seconds, the shadow moved very slowly, almost like it was coming towards my room. With a cracked voice, I whispered, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No response came back and the shadow was just still. I reached for my phone to text my sister, but the moment I moved, the shadow shifted again. Like it reacted to the sound, I froze, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Time felt strange after that. Minutes felt like hours. And at some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of heavy breathing. Not mine, but right next to me. I looked around, and nothing was there. Then I stared at the gap under the door again. The shadow was gone. Then suddenly I felt a heavy pressure on my chest and I was pushed back into my bed. Something was holding my hands down and sitting on my chest. Something small and heavy. I could barely breathe. I tried to scream out, but no voice came out. After a few seconds, which felt like hours, the feeling was gone. I was no longer pushed back, so I sat up and rubbed my hands where I was held down. When I looked at my arms, there were handprints, red and small, around my arm like a child had squeezed it. This rattled me so much that I wasn't able to sleep at all for the rest of the night. The next morning, when my sister returned, I told her about what had happened. That's when she told me the same thing had happened to her before, and that it was just sleep paralysis, maybe caused by the pressures of being alone and falling asleep scared. When I told her about the shadow I saw under the door and the marks on my hands, she said it was just my eyes playing tricks on me from the lack of oxygen. Since I had looked up to my sister, my mind just naturally believed what she was saying. It was an easier explanation to believe. I returned to my house that afternoon, itching to tell my friends about a paranormal experience and its debunking. The next night, while I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang. It was my sister, so I picked up the phone and said hello very cheerfully. But on the other side, I could hear heavy breathing, but no other sound. "What happened?" I asked. No response, just heavy breathing, then a small laugh and a crude, evil voice saying, "Say goodbye." Panicked and shocked, I ran to my parents' room yelling. My dad and I took his car and hurried to my sister's house, which luckily was very nearby. The door was locked, and in between our unanswered knocks, we heard a small gasp and then a slight thud. My father slammed his body into the door, breaking the lock. We called out to my sister, but there was still only silence. We rushed into her room, and we saw her lying to the side of the bed, unmoving. My face went white and slack. My father, who was a doctor, rushed to her side. He checked her pulse, saw that it was weak but still there, and started pumping her chest, administering CPR. He yelled at me to call for an ambulance. That shook me out of my shock, and with trembling fingers, I took out my phone and called an ambulance. When we spoke to the doctors the next day, they said my sister had a serious heart attack, and it was extremely lucky we got there when we did. If we had arrived just a few minutes later, she would not have been here today. The next day, I finally talked to my sister about everything. I told her how we rushed over because of the call I got from her number. She said that she didn't remember calling me and that she was asleep. I don't know if whatever had phoned me was the same thing I saw behind her door, or if there were two different things in that apartment. I honestly don't know what to think anymore, but as disturbing and creepy as that phone call was, I'm grateful I got it, because if I hadn't, I don't know what would have happened to her.